Network Dojo.
Hey, Jeff Rensink here with Network Dojo, and this video is specifically about helping people make that decision. Do I go for the current CCIE version 3.1 certification, or do I wait and go for that CCIE Enterprise Wireless version 1.0? So people who are currently thinking about or working on 3.1, what should they do? So this is all for you to help you figure out how do I plan this out? Is it worth my time to invest into 3.1, or is it a better choice to sort of hang back and focus more on the new Enterprise Wireless certification? So we'll talk about how the new certification sort of affects you, what you need to know to make the best decision for you, considerations to take, and then at the end of the day, my advice. So first off, some important details to know. So we need some accurate information to best make the decisions for ourselves. So the last day to achieve the CCIE Wireless version 3.1 certification is February 23, 2020. It's probably a couple days earlier than that because that's a Sunday, I believe. So most places you can only take the exams on weekdays. The new exam starts CCIE Enterprise 1 February 24, 2020, which is a Monday. Although most likely you won't be able to take the lab that day. There's most likely going to be sort of a couple weeks where they cut over from the old stuff to the new stuff, but that's the advertised date for everything. Most people are going to take 1 or 2 tries to pass the written exam, assuming that they're sort of following my recommendations. If you ever fail a written exam, there's a 15-day wait period in between attempts, starting the day after. On the lab side of things, most people will take 2 to 3 attempts before they pass the lab exam on average. That's the most common numbers. Again, assuming that they're following my recommendations. There is a 30-day wait period between attempts on the lab side of things. What happens if you get your CCIE Wireless before the exam update? So you're one of those people who have already been working on version 3.1, or I guess you're ready to start working on it today, depending on when you're actually watching this video, and you actually passed the lab before February 24, 2020. Cool. You got the CCIE Wireless certification. Maybe you already have it, and you're just sort of watching this video for out of curiosity. For you would continue to keep your CCIE Wireless certification as we transition over to the new program, but it will expire out. You won't be able to renew it once we pass that February 24th date. But you will get for free the CCIE Enterprise Wireless exam certification with the same expiration date of your CCIE Wireless. And so you get the new certification, the new CCIE, for free, and that's the one that you'll recert over time. And so eventually you won't be a CCIE Wireless anymore. You'll be a former CCIE Wireless as that expires out, but you will be a CCIE Enterprise Wireless, and you'll be able to recert that into the future. You also get an Enterprise Core Badge certification for free, but that's usually kind of a secondary bonus for people transitioning. Okay, what if you are working on 3.1 and you actually pass the written exam before the change, but you don't actually pass the lab exam? So for you will get credit for passing the Enterprise Core exam. It's just abbreviated ENCOR. That's the exam that you use to be able to take the lab exam. It's kind of the new written exam in the new program there. And so your Enterprise Core exam will inherit the expiration date of your CCIE Wireless written exam, and you won't have to pass an additional written exam just to be able to take the new Enterprise Wireless lab exam. So you won't have to redo the written exam. Once you pass the CCIE Wireless written, as long as that's still valid, it hasn't expired out by the time the new program comes along, you will get the Enterprise Core credit and be able to take the lab exam without additional hurdles to overcome. Again, so that lab taking time frame will translate over. So if you say passed your wireless written exam on February 24th, 2020, 1 year before the program changeover happens, you would have 2 years left on it. And so you'd have an Enterprise Core credit with 2 more years of validity of taking the lab exam there. Also in the new program, we no longer have those requirements where when you pass the written exam, you have to take your first lab exam within 18 months and then subsequent exams no more than 12 months apart there, or your written exam would prematurely expire. That's what it is today in the legacy, the old program, but in the new program, those are gone. So whatever qualifying, that enterprise core exam is good for up to 3 years. Again, 3 years from whatever the expiration date of your written wireless was. It inherits the same, expiration date. Those 18-month, 12-month criterias go away. So it could even be a scenario where, hey, 2 years before the program change happened, I did pass my CCIE Wireless written, but I never took the lab exam. In today's certification, if you didn't take it within 18 months, well, that written exam expired prematurely. Well, you know what? We get some new life breathed back into that. Those timeframes go away, and so I'd still have 1 more year. So 2 years had already gone past, the new program change happens, even though I didn't take the lab before, and it kind of messed me up for the old program. In the new program, I would still have 1 more year left in that enterprise core credit to take the lab exam. So it's a win-win, definitely in that respect. Now, if you haven't passed the CCIE written exam prior to the new date, normally you would have to then pass that enterprise core exam in order to qualify for the new lab. But there are other ways to get credit for that enterprise core exam. One way might be having passed recently the CCNP Wireless, CCNP Route Switch, or CCDP, because that gives you the core exam. Actually, certain exams within them do. So it's really going to depend on what exams you've passed and when did you pass those exams. There's a migration tool that's going to help you understand, okay, if I've passed these exams, that translates to credit for these new exams in the new program. And again, I'm going to have another video that talks about actually this particular scenario right here. What are all the ways you can get credit for that enterprise core exam that will let you take the lab exam without having to retake the enterprise core exam first additionally. So, how can we get credit for already have taken it? So look for that other video. That'll get into all the details, because it's a little confusing to wade through it. It took some back and forth to get the answers for that one. Okay. Another thing that we need to know as we sort of formulate our plan, and we'll get to the plan in just a little bit, but all this is sort of background information leading us up to be able to figure out what the best plan for us is. So we need to know typical CCIE prep time investments. So we need to know, okay, how fast can we get lab ready? Which is going to tell us, okay, when can I take my first legit lab attempt? Which is then going to help us figure out, okay, how many lab attempts do I think I could actually get in based off of that first lab attempt day. So if you haven't passed either exams, remember, most people are going to take 1 or 2 attempts at the written exam and 2 or 3 attempts to pass the lab exam. That's not to say that you couldn't pass the lab exam on your first attempt. Does not say that you might need 4 or 5 attempts to pass the lab exam, but these are the most common numbers that I get with my students. And so this also assumes that these are attempts on the same version. So if you took version 2 or version 3.0 of the CCIE Wireless Lab, and you haven't taken anything since then, well, you know what? Those don't count anymore. They're too far in the past. So 1 to 2 attempts of the current version of the written, 2 to 3 attempts of the current version of the lab. And it also assumes that that first attempt that you're taking is an attempt that you are well prepared for. You're not just sort of taking a reconnaissance garbage attempt to get information. That doesn't count. I mean, it helps you, but don't consider that an official attempt. Total study time investments can range dramatically on a person-by-person basis. 400 to 700 hours is kind of a reasonable time frames. Some people are going to be lower on the spectrum, some are higher, some might be outside these ranges, and those would be the exceptions. But these are reasonable ranges that most people fall inside of. So when you look at that big time range, I mean, it's hard to plan when it's that large of a range. So how do you what affects, whether you're on one end of the spectrum or the other? Your knowledge level and experience level coming into the overall study process. The more of that experience and knowledge base you had coming in, obviously the faster you're going to be able to prepare yourself. It's going to take fewer study hours. Access to quality study materials is always a major advantage in terms of studying or getting ready in fewer hours. Your ability to learn new material and retain it. Some people do it a little faster than others. It's just the way it is, and that's fine, but just know that about yourself. Your consistency in studying. If you're really streaky where you get a couple weeks on, a couple weeks off, 1 week on, 1 week off, that's not as good as being pretty steady state in terms of your consistency. Budget and travel abilities will sometimes affect your ability to take tests frequently. So once you're ready to take the lab, if you can sort of hit it hard and not have long gaps between your test times, that's going to shorten up your overall timetable as well. So if you can have the budget and travel abilities to do it in a faster sequence rather than a spread out sequence, it's beneficial. And unfortunately, luck chance can also come into play when it comes time to dealing with things. Usually we don't get lucky in pass, but we can get unlucky. We can get unlucky when we sit down for a lab and then there's just a technical situation outside of our control that prevents us from even completing the lab. Can't do anything about it, bad luck, right? We can, in our study time, we get hit with some sort of a health issue. Bad luck, right? Or a family issue, or a work issue. We lose a job, or whatever it's going to be. So again, usually you don't get lucky and like have everything fallen to the place and like pass super fast. It's just that sometimes we can get unlucky and sort of delay things. Okay, so that'll help you try to figure out maybe what end of the spectrum in terms of hours you will be. So figuring out how likely passing version 3.1 will be, at the end of the day, as you're trying to figure out, do I want to invest into 3.1 or not, you want to try to semi-figure out, okay, well, what are the odds of me actually passing under this version? And then you can try to figure out, okay, is it worth the time and money investment investing into this, or would it be better to save some of that time and money for the next version? So do accept that there are no guarantees. There's no guarantee that you will pass under this current version. There's no guarantee that you will pass any one individual lab either. So at the time of this recording, we have about, actually it's not even 8 months and a week left, now it's 8 months left. I made this slide deck about a week ago. So depending on when you're watching this, do your own calculations. Again, February 24, 2020 is the changeover date. Again, it's impossible to have a 100% chance of passing any given lab attempt. Almost nobody passes on their first attempt. In version 3.1, I've had 2 people pass on their first attempt. It is a rare feat to pull off. But 2 and 3 attempts, that's the majority of the people who do pass. Some people do take a few extras. But a lot of those people who took extras actually had previous attempts on other versions as well. So, you got to sort of weigh that in there as well. But typically, the more attempts you make, the higher your overall chances increase, because each attempt is a percentage chance at passing, and each attempt usually increases those percentage attempts on any individual one, because you're oftentimes seeing very familiar things time and time again. But again, something out of your control can always happen, so impossible to get to the 100% guarantee. Things that will increase your odds of passing, though, if you want to increase those odds of passing on fewer attempts, I guess, or just in general, I guess take more lab attempts would be one way to really help you pass the lab. The more attempts you have, the more chances you have, and can't win if you don't play, right? Study your butt off. I mean, hard work, crucial. And not only study the hand and do a lot of hands-on stuff, but also make sure that you're not ignoring knowledge and theory information, because you got to be able to interpret those tasks and understand what it is that they're asking you to do, not miss the clues. That's important as well. You got to have good materials to study from. That's just going to shorten your learning curve. Make sure that you're not leaving as many gaps in your knowledge base than maybe you would if you weren't following a good study program or using good study materials. You want to have solid execution. This is honestly avoiding point loss. So we might know every last thing, be able to do it forwards and backwards, blindfolded, but if you are, just fat fingering stuff and not realizing it, if you are forgetting to configure things on both controllers and you only configured it on one, or you missed a checkbox over there, just simple little slips, simple oversights. Whoops, I forgot to do that bullet point on that task. Those add up fast, and you can fail a lab simply on poor execution, even though you are technically solid on everything. And then support and help from others, be it a good instructor, other people currently studying for it. That's going to help you as well. So if you want to if you have money to throw at things to help increase your odds, awesome. That's not a luxury everyone has. But if you have that luxury, if you already haven't invested in good study materials yet, get them. I mean, that's massively important. Not that you have to have every last thing, but just at least some good study materials, vitally important. Consider classes. I know for me, when I look at the numbers, when I look at the people who have attended my classes versus the people who have bought a lot of my materials but not attended a class, the people who have attended classes have a much higher percentage of passing the lab. It's not to say that they attend my class, walk out, take the lab, and pass it. It's not that easy, but they are the people who ultimately pass their lab at much higher percentage rates than the people who don't. Also consider taking an early reconnaissance attempts, and this is valid for both the written or the lab. So you could just, when I say a reconnaissance attempt, what this is you're taking an attempt before you're fully prepared, just so that you can sit down, experience it, and memorize as much stuff as you can. Because at both levels, written and lab, there's a lot of repetition between attempts. You know, it's not so deep as to see a completely different set of written questions and not have a bunch of duplication from one attempt to another. The lab's kind of similar to that as well. And so once you've seen it, you kind of know what to expect. You know the drill, you know what to dig deeper into. It's not to say that, again, you won't see some new stuff on that subsequent attempts, but there will be repeated stuff almost every time. So that's just going to help you be all the better prepared for when you take it for your first real attempt. But it's not the cheapest thing in the world to do that. Okay, so ballpark numbers. Now, and these aren't based off of official records or anything. I don't technically have official records of, okay, this number of people passed on the first attempt, this number of people passed on their second attempt, and so on and forth. I'm kind of going off of just sort of what I kind of remember, you know, the most common numbers being. I do know how many people pass on their first attempt, at least of the people who have reported to me, it's 2. So those odds are low, you know, 5 to 15% chance of passing on your first attempt. And this is, you know, even if you did well preparing, it's just a tough exam. And I'm talking about the lab here. 50% of people will probably pass after 2 attempts, 80% after 3. So by far, 2 and 3 attempts are the most common numbers that I see in terms of people who pass the lab. 1's very rare, but it happens. 4 or more, again, not as rare as 1 attempt, but still the minority when you sort of take a look at the bell curve of statistics here. Now, if you go ahead and take a reconnaissance attempt, bump up those first chance or 2 by another maybe 10 to 25% chance. You get the biggest benefit the first or second attempt after the reconnaissance attempt. After that, well, your first and second attempts were also reconnaissance attempts for your third attempt. So it's a diminishing return. So, but those are just some general numbers you can use to try to figure out, okay, if I can get 2 attempts, maybe that's a 50-50 shot. If I can get 3 attempts, that's pretty likely that I'll be able to pass, but not a guarantee. So as you sort of figure out what's right for you, try to figure out what these odds mean to you in terms of if it's worth it or not. So figuring out if version 3.1 is a reasonable goal. Now that you sort of have all that background information, you can kind of figure out, okay, what's going to be appropriate for me, and some of that's going to come down to how many lab attempts do I think I'm going to be reasonably able to get before the version changes. And so the big factor into that one is how long is it going to take to get to that first attempt. So figuring that out, which will then help you figure out how many lab attempts you can reasonably get. Do you have the time and budget for that? Because if not, you're going to shrink your numbers right there. And also, what are the consequences if you don't pass? If it's not a big deal, you don't pass, it won't affect your budget for future attempts and new versions. Yeah, well, why not? No big deal. Even if it's 50-50 shot, cool, might be worth it. But if you only have time for or budget for so many attempts over the next number of years, you can try to figure out, okay, well, do I want to invest them in this one or do I want to invest it in the new version? So how long will it take to get ready for that first lab attempt? So try to focus first on how many study hours you think it's going to take to get lab ready, and then translate that into calendar days. So if I think I still have 300 more hours of studying based off of things that we've talked about and how many hours I've already put into things, 300. Okay, now I'm going to look at my calendar and how many hours a week can I fit in my calendar? Look at those times. Okay, well that's I'm on vacation that week, so that's very little time that one. But that one, ooh, I got some days off there that I'm not going anywhere, so I can increase my hours over here. So fit it into your calendar. Add a little wiggle room in there because stuff does pop up from time to time, and try to figure out, okay, when can you get that first attempt in? Now, once you kind of know when you think you can get that first attempt in, schedule that first attempt as soon as you can, because there's no guarantees that dates around that time might not fill up between now and 3 weeks from now or something like that. So if there is a date in your desired location near that desired time, lock it in would be a good idea. And then once you start taking that lab, plan to then take subsequent attempts if needed as quickly as possible with as short of gaps between them, with the one exception being if you only have one attempt left, okay, maybe push that one out as long as you can to get yourself some more study hours. But barring that one, try to take it as quickly as you can, knowing that there's a 30-day wait period in between lab attempts here. Note that you cannot schedule your next lab attempt until you fail your currently scheduled lab. So I can't schedule 3 different dates out at once. I schedule one date out. I take that lab that day. If I don't fail, the next day I can then try to schedule my next attempt. The calendar at that point will probably look different than the calendar at today's date. You know, if your first lab attempt is 2 months out and you look 3 months out, okay, if I don't pass that one, what does it look like there? Okay, yeah, you might have some dates today, but in 2 months, what is that going to look like? Might look a little bit different than today, right? So don't assume that dates far in the future will be still there, you know, a little ways out. Other people are going through the same process. As we get closer to the end, I would assume dates are going to fill up at an accelerated rate. So let's try a scenario here. So let's say you schedule your first attempt for early September, let's say September 1, which today is really easy to get in a lot of places, but look at the scheduling calendar and see for your desired location. Some places have way more dates than others. And so depending on your location, you might have much fewer options than if you were located somewhere else, or you could take the test somewhere else. So be mindful of that. But let's say I can get September 1. I have that available to me. I'm in the United States. Cool. Richardson, September 1. Cool. I have that date. Locked it in. I go to that date. I fail. Pretty normal on attempt number 1. Almost no one passes on attempt number 1. So now it's September 2. I can schedule my next attempt earliest of October 1. So 30 days between attempts. But the question is, on September 2nd, what does October look like in terms of schedulability? Maybe early October is kind of booked up. So the next best date I can get is late October or early November. So let's say it was October 30, day before Halloween. How about that? Cool. So I've got October 30th scheduled. I take the lab on October 30th and I fail. October 31st, Halloween. I look at the calendar. Okay, now I can schedule, you know, late November, early December. So November 31st or November 30th and on. But at that time, what do things look like? Well, the best I can get is, say, late December, early January. And I schedule that, and I have my third attempt there. Hopefully I pass at that point, because come late December, early January, my next available date to schedule would be late January, early February, which at that point, the days might be fully gone. So in this scenario, it looks like I could probably get 3 attempts in if these future projections are reasonable, but probably not 4. Unless I had a lot of options to travel to different places that might have had a better date available to me. So if you can travel, options open up. If you can't travel, you're limited to where you're able to take the exam. Okay, let's take another example. So let's say, in this case, a little bit later. So my first attempt is now a month later, October 1. Fail October 1, October 2nd. Now my next available date is December 1. So now we're bigger gaps here for whatever reason. Okay, take December 1. On December 2nd, I look at the calendar. My first possible date to schedule would be January 1, but you know what? January, February, already fully booked up, and I'm done. I can only get 2 attempts in, again, unless I can travel somewhere that does have a date. Although, watch the calendars, you know, every single day someone might have dropped, and so you can try to sneak it in if you can, but you gotta be on top of it for sure. So, the later you push back that initial date, you then start potentially dropping the total number of exams that you could theoretically get in. It's not saying you need all of them, but again, if you want a pretty reasonable chance at passing, try to give yourself 3 attempts. You might not need all 3, but if you can give yourself the possibility of 3, you have a pretty reasonable chance at getting the certification before we move into the new version. So to kind of wrap this up here, I just want to point out, just don't assume that you're going to be able to pick the perfect dates every single time. You get what's available at the time you need to schedule. If you can travel, more options become available, and the ability to pick the perfect date gets a little bit easier. And try to, if you can, shoot for 3 attempts. So for me personally, if this was my plan and I wanted to try to get 3 attempts, then I'd be shooting for my first attempt no later than September or October. But the earlier the better. Too much later than that, you start running the risk of maybe only getting 2 attempts, and then it starts to become a coin flipped kind of a scenario. But I'm kind of risk averse, so I like higher odds than medium odds. I don't really necessarily want to have to travel, because outside of Richardson in the United States, I'm going to have to travel pretty far for some other testing facility, so I'd rather not have to do that as well. So everyone's got their own scenarios, everyone's got their own risk variabilities, ability to travel, all of that. So this is just sort of a way to play out a couple scenarios to see, okay, how can I put myself into this scenario and figure this out for me? All right, so what if you will not pass under version 3.1? And it could be for a number of reasons. You might just decide right up front you're not even going to bother attempting 3.1. You know, you haven't even started studying yet. There's no way you're going to be ready until November, December, and you want 3 attempts and you're not confident. So you know what? Whatever. I'll just wait for the new version. Or you try and you fail. And unfortunately, you didn't get it done in 3.1, so now you're forced into the new version here. So what are some things to keep in mind, and if need be, how can you start preparing for the Enterprise Wireless version 1 today? So remember, the written exam, the CCIE written exam translates over into the new program with that Enterprise core. So you can try to, even if you don't plan on passing the lab for 3.1, you could still pass the written exam for 3.1 and have that give you the ability to skip out on actually passing the Enterprise core exam in the new program. So things to think about. CCIE written exam, almost all wireless, but technically tougher questions. Enterprise core exam, technically easier. It's sort of a base level CCNP exam, but very little of it is wireless. Most of it is going to be more route switch and non-wireless topics inside there. So what, based off of your skills and background, what sounds like the more easier thing for you to pass, or what's the more desirable thing for you to pass? You know, it might be harder to pass the Enterprise core exam, but that might interest you more. That's cool too. And then just remember that your dates and expirations will carry over for the future lab attempts. So if you pass your written exam on January 1, 2020, you get almost 3 years of Enterprise Wireless lab attempts, because, you know, two months later we move over into the new program. The Enterprise Wireless Blueprint is very similar to our current version 3.1 wireless CCIE blueprint. Pretty much everything in the current version 3.1 blueprint, with the exception of some of the autonomous stuff, carries over. It's just under new code levels inside there. So we still have all of our AirOS stuff, all the technologies in AirOS, just 8.8 code instead of 8.3 code. Still have Mobility Express in there, still have CMX, still have ICE, still have Prime infrastructure. It all moves over in there. But then on top of that, we add in DNA Center, we add in the Catalyst switches and controllers, the Fabric, SD Access type stuff. And so we're just expanding our topic list. We're not really taking very much away at all. And so whatever you learn today in pursuit of version 3.1 carries over into Enterprise Wireless 1.0. Try not to get too discouraged about the new version. I know no one wants to see, oh gosh, now I guess I've already worked on 3.1, or I wanted to start working on 3.1, and now I got to deal with this new version. It inevitably pushes out timelines, potentially increases budgets, because, you know, maybe you took a few attempts at 3.1 and now you got to take attempts in the new version as well. You know, can add more work, again, just depending on your situation. So that can be discouraging, honestly. And it's frustrating for sure, especially if you put a lot of effort into 3.1 and it doesn't happen for whatever reason or another. Now, the good news is we do have lots of warning, 8.5 months of warning from the initial announcement, which is huge. I mean, it's a big change in the program overall, but for us, it's not massively different from a technology perspective, so we're not needing to learn tons of new things. Know that you control your budget. Now that you know this information, you can figure out, okay, it's worth it to go after 3.1. Or you know what, it would be smart, budget-wise, to just hold off and wait for the new version and not spend money on lab attempts if I don't feel like I have a high probability of passing in this version. Do know that if you buy materials from me at Network Dojo, any 3.1 materials that you've purchased, you get free updates into the Enterprise Wireless 1.0 track, and so you don't have to rebuy stuff from me unless you want to buy new stuff. Like if you buy a smaller bundle, you want to move into a bigger bundle, yeah, you got to spend more money for that, but whatever you have today, you'll have corollary materials in the new version for free, so you're good there. It's not as big of a change as it may first appear. It's basically everything that we cared about today, plus some new stuff, not a complete overhaul of every last thing. The technology changes are honestly positive. I mean, we kind of do need to know DNA Center and SD access and that world, right? We may not be deploying it everywhere today, but everyone's, well, not everyone, a lot of people are looking at it. We need to at least have a comfort level with it, and honestly, it's the future from my understanding. So it's the world we're going to move into anyways. So yeah, may as well embrace it, right? And then you control your attitude, remember? So you could choose to have a poor attitude about it and it's going to affect you. Or you can just say, you know what, change happens, let's just embrace it. There's nothing I can do about it anyways. Now that I know the information, let's make my plan, let's move forward, let's get it done. So how can you start preparing for the CCIE Enterprise Wireless today? So if you want to study anything about current CCIE, that's directly helpful. You know, grab some controller that runs 8.8 code. You can start practicing on that. Most of us have access to some, hopefully, controller here or there, or even if it's a virtual wireless LAN controller, we can do something like that. Start reading up or watching Cisco Live presentations on the new Callis controllers, DNA Center, SD access type stuff, particularly as it applies to the wireless world. ICE things and related to all of this. Keep an eye out for product updates from Network Dojo. We're already at work developing new stuff, or at least in the planning stages today, but development will come not too long after that. And then again, don't forget to think about which written exam fits you best. Do you want to, while you're waiting for the new version to come, tackle that CCIE Wireless written exam, or do you want to wait for the new Enterprise Core exam? So if you have any questions about this, feel free to shoot me an email, jeff@networkdojo.com. I'm happy to try to help you out. I mean, CCIE Wireless is really what I do, and so I'm happy to help people out in that space where I can, even if you're not a customer for me today. Maybe you will be in the future, who knows. So with that, we'll say thank you. Make sure you check out networkdojo.com if you haven't done that already, and we will see you in the next video.